hear me? No. No? Do you guys hear me now? Yeah. Hi, thank you so much for coming to this student debate. My name is Rose Garrison. I'm a 3L, and I'm also the president of the Republican Law Student Association.
My name is Colin Coleman. I'm a 2L. I'm the president of the American Constitution Society.
Go ahead. My name is Lucy Robinson, and I'm your ABA Vice Representative.
Okay. I'm Professor McGaw, and I'm a teacher in Comp 1. I'm so grateful to be this. I'm faculty advisor for ACS and ACLU, so if you like this event, we'd love to have action.
I just wanted to give you guys a couple rules. There will be clapping to introduce the candidates, and at the very end, but if you guys can hold off on clapping during the questioning, the cheering, just be a little, remember this is a professional event. Also, at the end, if you have a piece of paper, and if you have a question that you want the candidates to have, if we have time at the end, we're going to do a Q&A. So write it on a piece of paper, and at the end, we're going to send somebody along the aisles, and they're going to collect the questions, and we'll pick from those that ask about what questions will be asked. Now to introduce the candidates. On this side, we have Ronaldo Cartella. He wants you to know he's very honored to have this opportunity. A couple things about him is he's current president of the Hispanic American Law Student Association, president of Legally Gourmet, a community service organization, president of the Very Law Gator Nation and alumni of the University of Florida, president of the Barry Student Alumni Association Student Liaison, vice president of the Sports and Entertainment Law Society, vice president of the Republican Law Student Association, vice president of Legally on Target and advocacy for the Second Amendment.
Somebody's acted.
As well as a member of the St. Thomas More Society. Ronaldo has served 2 years as an SGA senator and 2 years as a vice president of the Federalist Society, as well as having served as a student body treasurer. Prior to law school, Mr. Cartella was the vice president of Phi Kappa Alpha while attending the University of Florida, where he graduated with a degree in history. He founded and still holds the title of vice president of Flixen Inc. software company, which has partnered with several Fortune 500 companies in the software field. You guys can give him up. Sitting next to Mr. Cartella, we have Nicholas Primrose. He is a 3L and is currently the president of the Barry Trial Team and will actually be leaving on Wednesday to compete at the Michigan State National Trial Competition. He has a bachelor's degree in political science and communications and a master's degree in public administration. Prior to law school, he worked at the policy director. He worked as the policy director for an Illinois State House race and for a libertarian think tank in Chicago. At Barry, he is the immediate past president of the Federalist Society and a member of RLSA. He is credited with creating the annual faculty debate held each spring semester. This past spring, he wrote a paper on the constitutionality of the individual mandate and is currently writing another paper on the topics of Chick-fil-A, mosques, and the First Amendment. Nicholas' professional goals should come as no surprise. He intends on working as a state prosecutor before running for public office with the goal of being a United States Senator for the state of Florida as a Republican. You guys can give him a round of applause.
On the other side, we have Keaton Abrams and Sal Imperiale. Keaton Abrams is a 3L. He's originally from Miami. He is interested in bankruptcy law. He went to Florida State and majored in English. Sal is, he's currently in 2L. Sal's a 2L. He's from Margate, New Jersey, which is just outside of Atlantic City. He graduated from Rowan University in Glasgow, New Jersey in 2011 with a major in poli-sci and a minor in criminal justice. He has 4 brothers, 2 of which have already graduated from Barry Law. He's currently a member of the Earth and Environmental Alliance.
If the candidates want to shake hands.
Can you hear me now? Okay. Because the Republican candidates won the coin toss, the first question will go to the Democratic candidates. The first question is a part of the ABA, from the ABA. The ABA this year is doing a workaday initiative, which is regarding student loan debt and loan awareness. Next week, we will be holding a luncheon regarding loan awareness and loan debt, where you learn about differences between public and private loans, repayment options, what to do after you graduate with your loan debt. The first question from the ABA is, in 2007, the interest rates for subsidized SAFR loans were reduced from 6.8% to 3.4%. Because Americans are struggling with repaying student loans. The economy is now weaker than it was in 2007, and Americans owe more in student loans than are trying to pay. How do you propose to assist students with respect to paying back student loans and creating the opportunity for people to even hold higher education as an option when the cost is so great?
Hello. First off, I'd like to thank the two clubs for putting this event on, and everybody for showing up, and the professors for helping us out. Let me begin by saying, encouraging more students to go to college and providing the means so that they aren't crippled with debt for most of their lives afterward seems to me to be exactly the job of the government. Last July, the President delayed the scheduled increase of the interest rate for subsidized student loans. This cost $6 billion and was paid for through small changes to the loan system. The result of this is that more people are going to college, which means more Americans can get better jobs with higher income. The other party's solution is not to decrease government spending on student loans, but to give government student loan money to private banks, which then give that money to the students. Which would be great if we want the same people managing the student loan market that oversaw the housing mortgage market. The cutback, I realize I'm speaking to people, myself included, that were affected negatively by the changes to the student loan market. The cutback in graduate student loans was an unfortunate casualty of the debt ceiling crisis manufactured by the other side. Ultimately, it was decided that money should be diverted towards making sure underprivileged students can afford college so that they can participate in our economy. Our plan also includes measures to curb out-of-control tuition increases and encouraging colleges to increase the value of the tuition of the diplomas they give out so that students can be in a better position to pay off their loans.
Thank you for that. I'd like to say that it's difficult because I'm close friends with Ken, and I happen to be friends with Sal, and I respect both of you very much, and I know Nick does as well. And I'd also like to thank you for this opportunity. It's an interesting question. I'd like to know when in history we started to think of the federal government as our babysitters, and when they're supposed to step in to taking control of certain debts that we incur. I'd love to see them take care of the housing debt, but that's not going to happen anytime soon. With respect to the federal government and student loans, I think what the federal government's role should be, rather than actually stepping in and paying for them or lowering the costs, which is very difficult for them to do, what they should be doing is encouraging other businesses to invest in the education system. Banks, for instance, already do that with MBA programs. We've got executive MBAs at pretty much every single institution. They pay for those institutions to educate their employees. So they actually subsidize the cost for their employees. It's free for the employees to take classes at night, sometimes they're out for 1 week. I'd love to see something instituted like that for graduate programs for law students. Could you imagine if a law firm got tax credits for actually paying off the student loans for its employees? I mean, that's really how you get this going right away, rather than waiting for a bureaucratic process that takes forever and frankly inefficient to try and take the role of what you should be doing yourself, which is paying off your student loans. I'd also like to see schools held accountable and be honest. I think it's unfortunate that we have a system of education. For instance, Harvard, which has a $28 billion endowment last time I checked. Students shouldn't have to pay to attend that school. They have enough money that they can pay for every single program just off their interest on that endowment. These are supposed to be non-profit institutions, and yet they're profiting off of the students. So I'd like to see that also change. Really what we should be talking about is job creation after school. We should be encouraging businesses to hire employees, especially right out of the school market, rather than the government doing it, which doesn't pay it well. And that's it.
The other side is always bringing up the concept that private enterprise as the only avenue for economic growth and prosperity. Yet actual success in any part of the private sector is dependent on having a college degree. The Republican plan would mean less students receiving a degree, and our plan means more. The few $1 billion that fund the student loan system are so small compared to most government spending, yet the attainment of a college degree is crucial. It makes such a huge difference in a person's financial situation. Government involvement in the system is integral to ensuring that more and more generations of Americans are able to compete in the job market and improve our economy. Thanks.
A follow-up for Mr. Abrams. Does your argument depend on the correlation between having a college degree and qualification for a job? So if your argument is that we should fund more student education and loans, then that necessarily depends on the fact that having an education would make it more qualified for certain jobs. Do we have evidence of that? Are we all competing for very, very few jobs in which there's a small market for?
I would say the trend of the last century is towards, if you're going to have a job that's going to provide for a family, it's usually going to involve having a college degree. There are very few jobs, and it's an ever-decreasing number of jobs that can actually sustain a person in this economy without having a college degree.
I think it's interesting that Mr. Abrams fails to realize that 25% of the population in this country graduates college. So you're talking about 75% of the population which does not have a college degree, and I think that's really where the question is going. So what are you going to do for those people? I think one of the greatest things that we can do is encourage people to work in the government, in terms of the military. The military employs people, pays very well, includes housing, and after which you get the GI Bill. And that would be an excellent alternative to going without a college degree, and they offer the opportunity to actually get it.
A follow-up question for you, Mr. Cartea. What is your view on supporting service by having loan forgiveness for students who partake, as you suggest, in the military or other government service? How does that play into your idea that the government shouldn't be funding people for their education?
I think there's a distinction between the government funding education and people earning their education being funded for them. I think if someone works for the government, especially the military or the federal government, they've served our country. They haven't just served themselves. They're not just getting a paycheck. It's not just for them. So we're rewarding them with the GI Bill. I think that would be the distinction between us saying, get a job, any job, or working for the service, especially because defense or justice or even the Commerce Department. I mean, doing anything for the government should be rewarded.
I agree, those incentives are part of the government plan to increase the value of a degree, to help students pay off their loans better, and just generally improve the welfare of this country and the economy.
Thank you. The next question is presented from the U.S. Committee. The next question is from the Student Bar Association. This question goes first to the Republican candidates. It is estimated there are 80 to 90 million gun owners in the United States. Over the last 2 years, gun sales have surged 30% according to FBI statistics. In light of high-profile cases such as the Colorado movie shooting, society progressed to the point that the right to own and carry a firearm has become a civil right, one protected under substantive due process?
I think the easy answer is yes. I mean, let's look at the history of gun law in this country. In 1976, D.C. passed a ban on guns in your house. You had to have it unloaded and had a trigger lock on it. In that time, the murder rate in D.C. was 73% higher than what it was when the law was put in place. And then after the Supreme Court found that law unconstitutional, only then did the murder rate in D.C. go down. I think that speaks for itself. It's a myth, and I know that Sal or Ken's probably going to bring this up. It's a myth that gun control laws make cities safer. I mean, the Center for Disease Control did a study, and it's a myth. I'm from Chicago. I spent 6 years in Chicago. President Obama's hometown. Okay, in Chicago, it's the hardest place to get a gun in this country. I mean, by all accounts, it is the hardest place. President Obama, when he was an Illinois senator, voted against a law that would make it not a crime if you shot somebody in self-defense in your own home. I mean, this is the president saying that you shouldn't be allowed to protect yourself in your own home, that you should face criminal charges if somebody breaks into your house and you kill them protecting yourself. Now, I think everybody can agree that that's just wrong. I mean, the Second Amendment, the framers found it so important that our country should have a right to own a gun, that they put it in the Bill of Rights. They didn't leave it up to another amendment to say, as Congress deems necessary in the future, you can come up with certain rights that people have. They found it so important they put it in the Bill of Rights. So I think, yes, it is beyond just a constitutional right. It's a civil right. In Chicago, every 10 days, there's an Aurora massacre. Nothing on the news about that. And they want to play that every time a big massacre comes up, well, then we need to start talking about gun control. No, every 10 days, there's an Aurora massacre in Chicago. That's a problem. And it's because of the tough gun control laws in Chicago. People aren't able to defend themselves. It's the irresponsible people that need to have guns taken away from them. Not people like myself, not people like Ken, who should be allowed to own guns.
That the president has a view on gun control different from the majority of Americans, both gun owning and not, is probably one of the greater outright falsehoods about the man and his philosophy. And I say that realizing that there are many. As a gun control advocate, I have as much to criticize the president for his inaction than the other side. There is a constitutionally protected right to own a gun. This is stated plainly in the Second Amendment and upheld against infringement unless by substantive due process in the 14th Amendment. The president believes this, and besides making a plea after the increasingly more and more common national tragedies like the one in Colorado and Wisconsin, that lawmakers in this country should maybe consider that the general public should not have access to the same weapons a Navy SEAL has, he has made zero steps to ban handguns and has never voiced any intention to do so. But there are common sense regulations that are in place and others that need to be in place so that the right to safety that the entire population possesses is protected. The First Amendment is similarly regulated. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater because of the harm this may cause. A ban on weapons that have only a practical use in self-defense on a battlefield and rigorous background checks to prevent those who have used guns illegally before from getting them again do not violate the Second Amendment, even under a strict scrutiny test. A gun is a person's property, and your property along with your life and liberty are guaranteed by the Constitution through the due process clause. But since misuse of your Second Amendment right frequently results in injury and death, it is perceivable that Congress and the President, who are charged with maintaining the public safety and well-being, need to regulate an extremely dangerous property like firearms. We have to free ourselves of this campaign of fear-mongering waged by NRA, the most powerful lobbying group in the country that belittle but misinform the general public in an attempt to scare them into buying tons of weapons and ammo from the companies that in turn fund the NRA, believing that there's an outright handgun ban is forthcoming. Why? As I have stated that President Obama is going to let you keep your guns and ammo, that doesn't mean he won't and shouldn't work to prevent the damage caused when guns fall into the wrong hands.
I think we agree on that. I mean, we need a ban on assault rifles. There really is no reason to have an assault rifle. We do need to continue to not let felons own guns. We need to be concerned about people that are mentally unstable from owning guns. I mean, I think that if anything, and it'll come out when the Aurora case goes to trial, if it does, but the guy was mentally insane probably. and there's no protection against that. The thing is, though, to at all suggest that an overall ban on handguns or rifles for hunting purposes should be even looked at is just, I refuse to stand for that. I will not stand for a government that wants to infringe on the Second Amendment right. It's something that's so important that it was written down in the Constitution. We should not stand for a government that wants to take away a responsible person's right to own a handgun, own a firearm. You know, the reason that these crimes are happening are not because we've got gun control, or it's not because responsible people own guns. It's because irresponsible people own guns, and the responsible people don't have a way to fend themselves off.
As a follow-up, Mr. Primrose, what is your view on, because it is the Second Amendment, it would be, any sort of infringement would be protected through narrow tailoring. Do you conceive of a possibility that government could regulate and meet the narrow tailoredness test? Or are you saying outrightly there shouldn't be any bans?
No, I mean, I think there are necessary bans. Like I mentioned, felons shouldn't be allowed to own guns, assault rifles, and mentally unstable, clinically. That would be an okay way to regulate. But an overall, like Chicago or like in Washington, D.C., I mean, the Supreme Court made it very clear. Those laws are unconstitutional. The way that they were trying to limit an individual's right to own a gun is not going to stand in the Supreme Court. And I think we really need to be cautious about states or cities like Chicago and other states that are really trying to put a damper on our responsible Americans' right to own a gun.
This is an issue where we do not argue, and I was saying before, there's a well-oiled campaign that completely overreacts to any time meaningful gun regulation is proposed, usually by our side, that any of the common sense regulations that we both obviously agree on can't get done.
Next question goes first to you both. Should Congress have increased the debt limit on August 2nd, 2011 to prevent default?
First of all, I'd like to take a moment to thank everyone who made this possible. Professor McGov, ABA, SBA. I think this is important. It's really a partisan and ugly political discourse we have right now in this country. So I think this is important, and to have the venue to speak is honestly, I'm honored and thank you. This debt ceiling debate was one of the most absurd debates in recent congressional history. First of all, before we delve into it, we have to know the difference between the debt and the deficit. Deficits are the difference between what the government takes in and what the government spends each year. The government takes in revenues through taxes, and it spends on Social Security, defense spending. Debt, totally different. Debt is accumulated deficits. If the government has to borrow money every year, then its debt will continue to grow. Since this country's inception, there's been one year that this country didn't have a debt. Now, the debt ceiling debate. It dominated talks in 2011, and the question was, should Congress raise this debt ceiling, this fictional, arbitrary debt ceiling, to pay bills that it has already spent money on? The most troubling part about this argument was its redundancy. The U.S. government passed a federal budget every single year. Budget passed every year. And this budget, a lot of times, pays down things that have already been spent. So usually this debt ceiling is seen as a mere formality and something just Congress has to do. Since 1940, Congress has approved 91 debt ceilings. 75 of those increased by varying amounts. The debt ceiling was raised 17 times under conservative God, Ronald Reagan. It was raised 7 times under George W. Bush. And it was raised 3 times under President Obama. But this is the first time in our nation's history that it was commandeered as this new political issue. Many proponents, Republicans. I think it's important to know that this is just a mere formality, and there's been Republicans and Democrats proponents of eliminating the debt ceiling in general. And I think the debate was something that everyone should know is.
We'll have time to reply. Yeah, I'd like to address the question directly first, and then I'll go ahead and attack what you guys said. There's a couple holes in it. The truth is that what should have been accomplished is some sort of agreement to cut or curb spending. That was what the issue was with the debt ceiling debate. Do I think the government should have, voted on the debt ceiling? Yes, we had to prevent the fall, and that would have been catastrophic to the entire world economy, not only ours. However, what should have been done, and what even our soon-to-be president Mitt Romney stated, is that he would have cut back and balance the budget. What you said about there never having been a deficit before, the budget's incorrect. I mean, your guy, Bill Clinton, he managed to have a surplus for 3 years. I mean, I don't think that that's accurate. What really needs to be done here is we need to stop finding ways and finding revenue streams to continue paying for something that we don't actually need. What we need to find is a way to manage what we're spending, look at what we're spending, what we're wasting on, and curb that, rather than having to constantly have to vote to increase the deficit. And that's the error in our ways.
Once again, Mr. Partaya mixed up the debt and the deficit. It's a common mistake a lot of people do make it. Bill Clinton had surplus with the deficit, not the debt. He paid down some of the debt, yes, but he had a surplus on the deficit, which is annual, not since the country's inception. Second, there's never been a struggle like this in history. Until the Tea Party congressmen came in their first term, this was never hijacked. This was a bipartisan issue. Votes on the debt ceiling were formalities that happened over 100 times in our country's history. So to say that this debate was something about spending. Now let's get to what the actual debate was. Congress, Democrats and Republicans wanted to have a 1-to-1 for every spending cut. There'll be a tax increase. That didn't even get a vote on the Senate or House floor. Next, the president, to the dismay of many liberals, wanted to cut spending 3-to-1 for every tax increase. Republicans said no. So what happens? We kick the bill down the road. Boehner, President Obama, had a complex issue and really didn't address the main topic.
We're going to put time to answer his question if you choose, or you're talking the next question.
Go ahead and move on.
Addressing our $16 trillion national debt will require sacrifices from everyone. One specific example is federal spending or tax provisions that benefit your state or district. Would you support eliminating or would you not? I would consider.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, why don't I stay? I'll do what I do in class. Okay. Addressing our $16 trillion national debt will require sacrifices from everyone. One specific example is of federal spending or tax provisions that benefit your state or district. Would you support eliminating or reducing?
All right, this is Senator Tom Coburn, October 2012 Waste Book. Okay, I challenge the Democrats to find one thing that they would like to cut. Because I'm going to tell you, they're not going to cut anything. But this book right here lists 202 pages of different government programs that need to be cut. For example, professional sports leagues are 501c3s, except for baseball, that get a tax break, which, if we eliminated that tax break for them, we would get $91 million of revenue to the government. They're not going to tell you that. Okay? They don't have actual spending cuts. And in fact, during the Obama administration, over the course of his 4 years so far, for every $7 the federal government took in, they spent 11. Okay, how does that make any sense? How are we going to run our country when we're spending $4 more than what we actually take in? What we should be doing is we should be having a budget that where we take in $7 and we spend $6.50, or we spend $7 exactly. But we cannot continue to have a $16 trillion national debt that they're just going to kick down the road because they don't want to make budget cuts. This waste book right here, 202 pages. I submit that if we took half of these cuts, we would be going down a better path than where President Obama wants to lead us.
Thank you. Mr. Primrose talked about $91 million. The Conservative Party, where were they when we put 2 wars essentially on credit cards? $91 million? That's probably 0.000, I don't know how many zeros, 1% of the actual federal budget. Let's go somewhere where no Republican or Democrat, for that matter, will have even proposed cut the defense budget. It's almost sacrilege right now in politics to talk about defense budget being cut. You're seeing it, weak, Warhawk. The military budget, defense budget, funds the Army, Navy, Air Force, and that was about $680 billion, 20% of our federal budget. And it should be noted the cost of the wars were not paid for until the beginning of 2011. But other military expenditures not counted in the defense budget are nuclear weapons, which are in the Department of Energy, the injuries our troops have, Department of Veteran Affairs. Altogether, our military budget is $1.03 to $1.415 trillion with a T dollars annually. Just to compare this, to give us a global perspective, we spend more than the next 20 countries combined on defense spending, 17 of which are our allies. So we've invested $1.45 trillion over the next 10 years in one single model of a F-35 fighter jet. That's more money than any other country has put toward defense total. So this idea that $91 million in Senator Coburn's plan is the problem with government, it's absurd. And if this is the party of fiscal responsibility, why not cut the military? But nobody, except maybe true libertarians like Rand and Ron Paul, or progressives on the left like Dennis Kucinich, have even mentioned this during the debates.
It's funny, quick to attack the defense budget. And I think you said just straight up defense budget was $680 billion. Did I get that correct?
Yeah.
And then the other things they maybe total to $1 trillion, right?
Yeah, they do.
Okay, they told you. Welfare spending in this country is $746 billion. Wait, so it costs more money to take care of everybody in the spider web that we've created, this welfare spider web where it doesn't help people get back up, it just sucks them in. It costs more than protecting our country from terrorists. That's fine. If you want to put a proposal to cut that defense budget, go ahead. But let's look at that welfare budget as well, because that's actually more than defense spending, more than Social Security, more than any other government entity is spent on welfare.
That's fine. Is the patient protection and affordable care, otherwise known as Obamacare, good for America?
Look, first of all, the Supreme Court got it wrong, but we're stuck with it. So, it doesn't make any sense to me. The Democrats in the bill wrote that our power comes from the Commerce, that our power to have this law comes from the Commerce Clause. And they vehemently denied that this was going to be a tax, but look at what the Supreme Court did. It's not in the Commerce Clause, this is a tax problem. So, first promise that President Obama made out the door right there. Second, why is it, I don't think it's good. Why is it bad? 19.6 million new patients are going to be on Medicaid. Medicaid's not even sustainable as is right now. Once this goes into a place and there's 19.6 million more people, the doctors aren't going to get paid for this work. And in fact, the CBO, a nonpartisan group that helps out Congress, said that this is going to increase federal spending $1.76 trillion. On top of that, the American colleges say that they'll have a 90,000 doctor shortage in the next 10 years because doctors don't like Obamacare. They're not going to go get medical degrees because they're not going to get paid for what they do, and they're going to be under red tape. They're not going to get the face-to-face time with their patients. It doesn't make sense for them to go into that profession. Finally, you're placing small businesses in a very troubling position where if they have too many employees, they have to fund healthcare, and they can't. The insurance premiums are too high. And that's the problem with this law, is that it doesn't attack the real issue, rising healthcare costs. In 2002, healthcare costs for employer base went up 97%. Now that cost increase actually is higher than the wage increase of the people making money. And on top of that, the healthcare spending in America is at $2.6 trillion right now. It's over 10 times what it was 20 years ago, and we're on an exponential trend upward. It's not going to slow down at all. It's getting more and more. And our government doesn't have enough money to fund the healthcare.
Listen, the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, is not a flawless bill. I'm not going to stand up here and defend it. I'm not a surrogate for the Obama campaign. But I think it's a step in the right direction. It's 1,000 pages of legal jargon and medical terms that probably the people that voted for it haven't even read. So it's not a flawless bill. That being said, there's 49.9 million Americans uninsured in the year 2010. That's more uninsured Americans than all people live in South Africa. 7.3 million. That's how many children were uninsured in the United States of America in the year 2010. So what happens when these people get hurt? You don't have health insurance to go to the hospital. Do we turn you away? No. Legally, our medical professionals, emergency personnel, have a legal obligation to treat you. And on top of that, most doctors, graduate from medical school, will take an oath, a modern-day Hippocratic oath that says anyone in dire circumstance will be treated. So hypothetical, you're uninsured, you have little or no money, you go to the hospital, you receive $20,000 of care, which is not a lot. Who pays for that? We do. All the taxpayers pay for that. That's the single most expensive way. It's going in two ways. One, it almost incentivizes people to push off injuries until they compound and become a lot more expensive. And two, it drives a wedge between the people that pay and the people that don't. And these people are seen as free riders or moochers, which is truly just ugly rhetoric. Obamacare attacks this in several ways. One, if there's no more pre-existing condition discrimination, which is the most popular part of the bill. So you can't be turned away for pre-existing conditions, and they range from asthma, type 1 diabetes, genetic effects, smoking, and even on some absurd policies being a woman. The shared responsibility requirement, the individual mandate, contentious part of the bill, that just requires everyone to buy health insurance or pay a penalty. Also, it closes the donut hole, which is huge. Anybody with Medicare Part D understands that this is financially burdensome. What that is the government pays for prescription medication up to a certain point. Then there's a gap, then there's a government threshold that was made up by, who knows, it's an arbitrary number. So Obamacare took steps to stop that. It also covers preventative screenings, mammograms, colonoscopies. And also for young adults, many of us in here, you can stay on your parents' plan until you're 26 as opposed to 19. Now, real quick, the most ironic part about this bill is it's a conservative idea. The individual mandate was proposed by conservative economists. John Chafee introduced the bill to the House several times with the individual mandate. Mitt Romney instituted the federal government's model in Massachusetts, and it was wildly successful. So this idea that this is some liberal proposition is absurd. Liberals and many progressives on the left wanted a single-payer option, but that went out the door. So this idea that individual mandate is this government takeover, or Obama's taking over healthcare, it's really absurd, and it should be called for what it is. Wrong.
Socialist. That's what it should be called. Obamacare is socialist. Okay? There's no denying it. This is, let's kick out the private insurers from the market. We're not going to encourage any competition between private insurance companies. We're going to say the government is going to offer A, B, and C. That doesn't give any incentive for the private companies to offer D, E, and F as part of their plans. I agree. Look, we should have the pre-existing conditions. We should have tort reform. We should allow kids to be on their parents' health plan until they're 26. What I don't agree with is jamming it all into one bill, and like we said, Sal, half of them didn't even read it. I mean, now Nancy Pelosi says she finally got around to reading it, but great. 2 years after you pass it, you finally read it. Now, on top of this, Southwest Airlines had a business consultant come in, and they found out that it's going to cost Southwest Airlines $414 million to provide health insurance for all of their employees under Obamacare. Can I finish this point real quick? If they don't do that, they will only pay $111 million in penalties. So what does it make sense for Southwest to do? Pay for health insurance or just take a $100 million penalty? It saves them $300 million. Obamacare is terrible for this country.
I just want to touch on this socialist discussion because this is just, first of all, Obamacare adds people to the private health insurance. A lot of progressives would like it to be a single payer option, but this idea that it's socialist is just wrong. So socialism, I'm here to argue that socialism is what we had before Obamacare. Prior to the Affordable Care Act, the cost of uninsured free riders skipping their medical bills were socialized. Rather than going bankrupt, hospitals would increase the prices with people that pay for insurance. Hospitals then split those losses with the government. The government then taxes you higher to socialize those losses, and then your insurance premiums raise, and also your taxes raise. So this idea that it's socialism, just please explain to me. Take a moment to explain to us how that's socialism. Thank you.
Next question. What is the best way to slow the growth of healthcare costs in America over the next 25 years?
I think both sides. There's a lot of wasteful government spending there is. But Obamacare, Patient Protection Affordable Care Act, should lower these increases in healthcare costs. First of all, it adds 30 million new people to the medical field. So this idea that doctors are losing their jobs with 30 million more patients, I don't really see how that can be reconciled. Second, it adds people with pre-existing conditions also to the field, which will certainly shore up the markets. And also it stops the insurance providers from dropping someone as well, which is absolutely huge because now we have people consistently paying these bills, not worrying if they get sick they're going to go bankrupt. Also, I think the way it cuts truly more socialist programs like Medicare Advantage is good because this is a program that is consistently losing money, and I'm glad Obamacare tackled that. As I spoke about before, the donut hole is huge. That'll help out a lot of people.
Right. First, I want to answer your question about how it's socialist. Harvard economics professor Martin Feldstein said, and I quote, "It's all about the raw power to decide who gets what treatment, cramming everyone into identical little boxes in order to eliminate any individuality. No longer is it every man gets what they can pay for. It's everybody is equal regardless of what effort you put into it. That eventually private insurance companies will no longer have higher standards than the government, that it's effectively a government takeover of the healthcare industry." So how do we slow growth then? Let private insurance companies compete across state lines. Open it up into a broad network where every single company across the entire country, we live in Florida, we might have a really good plan out of California that'll save us money. Let open bidding. Right now, Medicare sets the prices for different things. When they use open bidding and allow the market to dictate, just for an example, the price of wheelchairs went down 40% when there was open bidding versus Medicare setting the prices. Create a private market. Let people choose to go into something else, that they don't have to go into Medicare. That'll provide the competition that I was talking about. And finally, tort reform. I mean, that's one of the biggest driving factors for the increased healthcare costs is lawsuits against doctors and hospitals. If you put a cap onto it, you can lower healthcare costs. Those are 4 ways right there, without Obamacare, that we can lower healthcare costs in the country.
I'd like to address a few things Nick talked about. First of all, these people, they argue that it's socialist, but no one argues that it's socialist at a state level. And also, I don't understand why it's not the court's job or anyone else's job to come in and stop a bill that our elected officials put forth. If there's an alternative, if conservatives have an alternative, put it forth. That's why we have elections. Second of all, no one gets dropped. This is one of the biggest myths about the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act. If you have health insurance, you're fine. If you're in Medicare, you're fine. If your employer insures you, you're fine as well. So this idea that it gets dropped is just I don't know where it comes from. And just to touch on tort reform, there is no data that suggests that states that have put a tort reform cap, how much you can collect, have any lower insurance premiums at all. There's no data. I'd love for Nick to show us some of that right now. So.
I mean, the fact that Sal sits says, show me data. Show me data that Obamacare is going to do what it says. And in fact, the CBO projects completely the other way from what the Democrats said it was going to do. Every single month, the CBO is coming out with another report that says it's going to cost us this much more now. It's going to cost us this much more now. Healthcare costs are going to be higher now. So show me the data that Obamacare is going to lower costs. You know, I gave you 4 different possibilities of what we can do without Obamacare to lower healthcare costs. And all you can say is show me a report. Show me how Obamacare is going to do that.
First of all, Obamacare is not fully instituted until 2014. I'm just going to first of all, Obamacare is not going to be instituted until 2014, so I guess we'll finish this conversation then. And the Congressional Budget Office, first of all, has said that Obamacare would, in theory, should save plenty of money, so I don't know where those numbers come from. And but this is just this fuels the fact that we need this discussion because these misnomers about the bill, I don't know where they come from. And also, Nick already said he likes to know pre-existing condition. He likes people saying on page 26. You like every good part about the bill, but you just want to get rid of the individual mandate. The bill comes as the bill. So let's institute it. Let's wait. And if there's another idea, and I'll start with an idea.
A follow-up for Mr. Primrose. On your idea of tort reform, I'm curious about the correlation between putting a cap on damage and compensation. It seems to me that tort reform suggests the idea that the problem is within the lawyer, whereas a tort happens because someone's negligent. So it doesn't mean that the sources of negligence the lawyers are there just for compensation. How does tort reform address that?
Well, I think the issue is that doctors and hospitals are under an enormous amount of pressure. Every single move is scrutinized. I mean, most of what everybody here is either in torts right now or has been in torts. I mean, they are the one profession where even the slightest little mistake, even if it's a reasonable person could have made that mistake, they get astronomical judgments against them. And that increases their insurance. That increases the doctors. And I mean, doctors and hospitals they don't want to do risky surgeries. Doctors don't want to go into professions where the premiums on their medical malpractice insurance are astronomical. So if you put a cap on it and you say, look, if this happens, you're only going to get this much. Like, I agree, yes, we need to have some sort of control on the doctors and hospitals from running wild. But I also think that to put that amount of pressure on a doctor and a hospital to maybe have to turn away the patient because it's too risky, they don't want to take the risk. It's terrible.
The next question from Mr. Primrose is the Defense of Marriage Act constitutional? Oh, Mr. President.
For me, this is for both sides. Going over time. No, I'm just saying, I was saying, because like, there's no one telling us like, when it's not like how time we have left in front of us, that's more the case usually have, so please forgive us.
So we can start this off real quick while I look through my notes. Is the Defense of Marriage Act constitutional? The quick answer is yes, according to the Supreme Court. Bill Clinton in 1996 signed into law after the House and the Senate both voted to enforce this law. While I don't agree that we should ban same-sex marriage, and neither does Nick. In fact, both of us feel fine with it. It's not a federal question, it's a state question. It's something that the states individually are supposed to deal with, and that's what this ban, that's what this law mandates. So basically, if I live in Florida and I get married in Iowa with Ken, I can't move to Florida and force Florida to acknowledge that I'm married. Florida has to say, we're going to acknowledge that. So whether or not it's constitutional, the answer is yes. Now, is it wrong? Perhaps it is something that we should address in the future. But as it stands right now, we have to adhere to the Constitution.
As integral to the philosophy of our democratic nation, as much as any other thing, is that while we rule by a majority, we protect the rights of the minority as well. The South's rejection of civil rights era changes was done with the support of the majority of the white population in opposition to the end of segregation, and it took the federal government and the Supreme Court to uphold the rights of the minority that have equal access to the protection of our laws. Our nation's history provides a pretty clear lesson that our union can't work properly if some people have rights in some areas and not in others. It is our position that, apart from being plainly discriminatory and mean-spirited, the defense of marriage is wholly unconstitutional as well. And as more and more courts seem to agree with us, it is pretty clear that it is only a matter of time before opposition to the legality of same-sex marriage is seen as a relic of a less-enlightened era along with segregation. I won't argue that the Founding Fathers specifically intended to protect the rights of gays and lesbians in the Constitution. They were very forward-thinking, yes, but I'll concede there's no evidence to suggest that treated sexuality any different than they do women's rights or slavery. In other words, not as progressive as our society has become since then. But nevertheless, the Constitution, as they wrote it, still protects same-sex couples' right to be free from discrimination on a federal level as well as a state level. It's there in the First Amendment, which protects our right to be free from laws based solely on religious beliefs, from which opposition to same-sex marriage is primarily based upon. I would also argue that Joe violates the First Amendment in the case where churches, even some Christian ones, that conduct same-sex marriages as part of their religion, having those marriages not treated equally under the law is a violation of the principle that the state shall not favor and one religion over any other. And again, the protection of equal rights is there in the 14th Amendment, which prohibits the state from denying any citizen equal access to the rights and privileges afforded to every other U.S. citizen. One of those privileges is recognition of one's own marriage and the benefits that those couples receive. Same-sex marriage is definitely non-traditional, as was interracial marriage and even the concept that man is equal under the law. Denial of rights because of this goes against the tradition of our country as a place where every man and woman, or man and man, or woman and woman is equal under the law, federal and on state level.
As a follow-up question to Mr. Cartaya, how do you reconcile the Defense of Marriage Act with the full faith and credit clause?
That's a great question. Honestly, yes. Maybe go back.
Sure. So the full faith and credit allows judgments from one state to be then respected in the next state. So that, for instance, if you are freed from a debt in one state, for instance, Florida, and you move to Georgia, you can then be imprisoned again in Georgia for a debt you paid in Florida. So the question is, if the Defense of Marriage only defines marriage in terms of a man and a woman, how does that come into play, or how is that reconcilable with the idea that we should have a uniformity of laws and the protection that goes from state to state if there's a state that recognizes a homosexual marriage, same-sex marriage?
The question would be, some states have taxation, state tax. Florida doesn't have a state tax. I mean, that would be my argument against it. It's not that we're saying they can't get married. It's just saying that some states are not going to acknowledge it. They don't have to. Currently in the Constitution. Now, do I agree with it? No. But that's currently where it stands.
It's completely ridiculous and impractical to have one. If you died and were not buried and were buried in a way that disagrees with the religious tradition of one state, to not have your death certificate honored in another state is completely ridiculous. And so your marriage certificate should all be treated the same way.
It really isn't an argument.
Does every law-abiding citizen have a right to food, a right to shelter, a right to education, and a right to health care provided by the federal government? Otherwise stated, does the U.S. government owe each person a house, a meal, a college degree, and the health care they require?
The preamble to the Constitution, the paragraph that outlines the reasons our founding fathers decided to break free from England and form our own country, and their expectations for the government they were about to create, places the responsibility of the government to provide for the public welfare. Food, shelter, education, and medicine are all bedrocks of what constitutes the well-being of every American citizen. Therefore, I would submit that the government has no other duty than to provide these rights, and it has been a challenge of every administration to increase the number of Americans whose needs for these kinds of things are met. I fail to see how in any description of the most powerful and prosperous country in the world, there would be any of its people who lack these basic needs. That does not mean that the government has to be the sole provider of these needs, or that those who wish to opt out of a college degree or of different means of preserving their own health can't be left to determine their own welfare, but to every citizen that asks for it, the government should be there to supply, or can direct them to having their needs met in the private sector. Our founding fathers believed that the government was to improve, and I would wonder why anyone would want to take up the responsibility of government, if not to improve the welfare of this country.
There are limits to the federal government, what they owe citizens. We owe every citizen the right to be protected from foreign attacks. We owe every citizen the right to basic human rights. We owe every citizen to not have their personal liberties infringed upon. The government does not owe everybody a house, a warm meal, a college degree, and especially health care, which we've already hashed out. Now, our country was founded on the principle that individuals possess certain inalienable rights to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. The founding fathers kind of threw property in there as well. But they didn't guarantee a right to happiness, a right to an education, a right to housing, a right to food. All we can guarantee as a federal government is the right to achieve all of those things. That we can allow people to act freely, to preserve their inalienable rights. See, we've failed our people. The Obama administration has failed our people. We have welfare. It's a spider web. I mentioned it before. We need to have safety nets. We need to have something where if somebody falters, we're there to catch them. But instead of grabbing on them like welfare, sucking them in, we need to push them back up and allow them to achieve on their own those same inalienable rights that the founders of this country wanted. We do not want to trap individuals. We don't want the government to become the lifeblood of individuals, which is exactly what the Obama administration wants. It's good politics for them to have everybody on welfare and on government-ran programs, because that's who votes for them. So their idea is suck as many people as they can into their programs to be reliant on the federal government. That's not how this country was founded. This country was founded on, here's your opportunity. This is a land of opportunity. We are going to help you. We are going to allow you to achieve those things, but we are not going to sit there, hold your hand, and bring you all the way to the top. No, that's not how this country was founded, and none of us in this room should want a country that is holding our hand and telling us, this is how we're going to get you there. No, that's not right. We are on law school for a reason, because we wanted to achieve great things. Okay? Don't forget that. This is not a country where the government sucks you in and you're relying on them. That's socialism, and that's not what this country is.
Saying that we can't afford it, it's our responsibility, is the easy and sadly irresponsible answer. I realize that the economy is weak at times, and even a well-regulated tax system might not be enough for every area of this country to have the infrastructure in place to handle these needs. But that is why we elect people ready to work through this challenge, instead of arguing that it's not a challenge to be solved by the government. Nothing will drain this economy faster than a growing number of the population who are homeless, sick, and uneducated. Nothing will make us more prosperous and ready to meet the challenges of the future than making sure every citizen has their basic needs met.
Just to respond real quickly, I'm not saying that we can't afford to, and we have things in place to help out people. For example, the government helps provide people in low-income families in finding affordable housing. I don't think we should take that away. I mean, there are certain things in place for the federal government to help out those that are at the bottom, that need help getting brought up. But to have a government where you're taking over private sector, you're taking over private people's lives, that's not what this country was founded on, and none of us should stand for that.
Okay, just to make a quick announcement, if you have questions for the candidates at the end, please pass them to Jonathan Luca and Adam on the side. Thanks. Pass them to the outskirts of your row, and they will collect the questions so we can review them. All right, next question. Some Republicans and Democrats say making limited changes to Social Security would shore up the program's finances for decades. markets that lawmakers are able to tackle dicey fiscal issues. What do you think needs to be done with Social Security for the future?
All right, I'm going to be real honest with everybody in this room. Do not expect a Social Security check when you get of age. I mean, I think both sides agree on this. Social Security is an unfunded liability that we cannot sustain any longer. We are going down a path where we're putting into a plan after 40 years of hard work that we're never going to get to see. Now, by the Democrats, their idea is, let's just raise taxes. We're going to have the wealthy people pay into Social Security because, well, they don't really need it. They've got private plans, and they'll help bankroll the rest of the country. But that's not the way this country works. See, Obama had 4 years to try and figure out what to do with Social Security. There were bipartisan groups put together and presented reforms to him. None of them passed because he has this idea that that's not how it should be done, that the rich people of this country should be paying for everybody else when they retire. Now, here's the truth. We are living longer now than we were when Social Security was implemented. And we've never changed the age where you can get Social Security. Now, what we think is that you need to increase the age. And we wouldn't have it affect anybody who is within 15 years of getting Social Security. Now, that would match the longevity that we're living in. And the liberals, I don't think that they're on board with this plan. But even if they're not, we really shouldn't be raising taxes in order to pay for Social Security. That's just kicking the can down the road. We will never have enough money to just tax our way out of this problem. Finally, workers should be able to have the choice whether or not they want their payroll taxes to go into a private plan or a government-funded plan. And I think we can all agree that we should have that choice. And then finally, we think that there should be a tiered plan to where if you are in a higher tax bracket.
First, I'd like to touch on what Nick said. Now, we completely agree with the age, definitely for saying that, but we completely agree that the age should be raised. Since Social Security was introduced in 1935, the age really has not effectively changed enough. It's changed, but it hasn't changed enough. But one thing that gets lost in this Social Security debate is how effective the program is. When it was instituted in 1935, 50% of elderly people would fall below the poverty line when they retired. So this is one of the most effective programs in history. And I think it's a bit alarmist to say, oh no, Social Security check won't be up for you when you retire. I think that's seriously alarming. So here's some facts. Social Security is solvent. It will be solvent until 2033 at least. But I think Nick's right. I think it's going to take a balance of tax increases and also cuts to benefit. Let's remember who we're cutting. And the only way to really shore up Social Security is either to raise the taxes or cut from the beneficiaries. So it has to be. I think it has to be a compromise of both. But that's really hard to do when a lot of people, GOP, will sign a taxpayer protection pledge by Grover Norquist and the conservative think tank Americans for Tax Reform. When they say no, we're not going to raise taxes at all. Listen, that's the part of government. It should be compromised, but it will absolutely take spending cuts and some cuts to beneficiaries. But also, I think tax increases on what individuals will pay into Social Security is important. Because if we're serious, and it's not just a talking point, about not taking this bill down the road to future generations, we have to do a little bit of both. And I think tax increases will certainly inject revenue into the system. And there's no reason it can't be solved for the next 1 week time.
Okay, so 2033 is where we're projected to finally run out. Is that that's it? So 21 years, I'm 26, I'll be 27 when Social Security runs out. So it's not a scare tactic for me to tell everybody in this room that by the time you get to the age where you need Social Security, it won't be this unless we do some sort of reform. And I'll submit to all of you, I don't think any of us should be having tax increases on the board, and I think we'll get into that in a later question. But at what extent are you soaking the rich so much that they're no longer rich? That they are funding every other part of the government for everybody else? I mean, you can't do that. I think Ronaldo will touch on that when we get to the taxes. But to sit here and say, well, we'll do tax increases. I mean, that's ridiculous. Let's put spending cuts on the board. Our federal government is the largest it's ever been, and if we don't put the Obama administration in check and the liberals in check, there's no stopping how big the federal government is going to get. I mean, that's just the truth of it.
Next question from the audience, please.
The first question from the audience is, if we, the United States, have an income problem, should we increase taxes? Do you support a flat tax? And that's to both sides.
Do we support a flat tax? In an ideal world, I would love a flat tax. I would love a fair tax. I would love any tax that makes everybody pay the same tax rate and level the playing field. And this country was founded on equality. They've been touching on gay marriage topic. Unfortunately, I really couldn't debate much on that one because I agree with the majority of Christians. However, on taxation, we're not going to see eye to eye. I think we really should have something more along the lines of a fair tax. A fair tax or a flat tax would eliminate the need of an IRS, which is grossly over budgeted, grossly inefficient, and it would be pointless to have if we had a fair tax or a flat tax. We wouldn't have income tax, so they wouldn't have to calculate that. You wouldn't have a business tax, you wouldn't have to calculate that. And you would have no corporate tax calculations. So we wouldn't need an IRS. We could basically have it self-sufficient like the DMV, where if you don't pay your parking ticket, they send you a letter in the mail saying, hey, don't forget to pay your parking ticket. The IRS is doing the exact same thing. Hey, you haven't paid your X percentage of your income, and you need to pay this much. Some of the issues that we're going to run into with passing something like this is that if you are going to do a fair tax or a flat tax, charitable contributions, school contributions, some of the other things, the deductibles that we would normally deduct, you can't do that anymore. And you're going to run into the schools who are going to stand up against this. You're going to run into churches who are going to stand up against it, and a lot of other organizations that are considered tax exempt are going to run into issues. But no, I mean to end it, I really think we need to revamp the tax system in this country. Otherwise, we're going to end up looking a lot like Europe. And I can go into some of the details if you want of the city. But let's go.
Fine. No, we certainly should not have a flat tax. That's been a common platform for conservatives since Steve Forbes ran on it. I mean, no, it doesn't work. No real economist has ever said a flat tax is even close to sustainable. But let's talk in that flat tax, do we raise capital gains taxes? Yes, the rich and super rich in this country certainly pay a lot of income tax. Certainly, but there's a huge distinction between income and wealth. Wealth is the value of everything a person or family owns. This includes land. Income, on the other hand, is what you make from your job. It's what you earn. Now, theoretically, there should be an overlap, but there is. Income, the top 1% makes about 7.5 times the median household. But wealth, the top 1% makes about 84 times. So there's a huge distinction that many people don't fail to recognize. Last year, the top 1% controlled nearly a third of the nation's financial assets. 1%, a third, and about 28% of non-financial assets. That's property, jewelry. So that's 1% of the nation, the 99% top, controlling about a third. Now, as I talked about before, they certainly pay their share in income tax. However, capital gains is only taxed at 15%. So I think a common solution, instead of a flat tax, would be raising the capital gains rates so that people who are wealthy and are well off would pay the same effective tax rate as an individual, the $50,000 a year teacher, or just somebody in a median household. I don't think it's about raising or lowering taxes. It's just about everyone should pay effectively the same tax. So I think it's efficiency issue.
I completely disagree with ever touching the capital gains tax. If anything, you should lower the capital gains tax. Just to explain to you what capital gains taxes are. I mean, that's taxes on investment. You would be curbing investment if you were to increase tax rates on investment. Currently, at 15%, if I have $100,000 and I want to invest in Apple or IBM stock, Apple takes that money and they go higher. If you start curbing their ability to get investment capital, it's going to destroy the economy as we know. Right now, we're one of the strongest stock markets for that very reason. I mean, look at France. France right now it just increased its tax rate on its wealthiest 1%. No, I'm sorry, its wealthiest 20%. They want to make it a 75% tax rate. Not only that, they want to tax 1.8% of wealth, even if you're not incurring any revenue on that wealth. So what's everybody doing? They're moving. They're not staying in France. They're going to England, which God forbid they would ever do before.
Last question from the audience.
The last question is, would either side consider removing oil subsidies, which are contributing millions in profits, or even billions?
I mean, this wasn't a topic, but to speak to it briefly, yeah, sure, absolutely. I think a lot of conservatives and some blue belt Democrats get upset when alternative energy examples like Solyndra. I mean, you can't turn on Fox News without hearing the word Solyndra. So they do that now when these things don't work out. But yes, I certainly think the party of fiscal responsibility, the Republicans, certainly should cut these oil subsidies. ExxonMobil, which makes $1.25 billion, does not need subsidies. I mean, we should subsidize things that look to the future. This is not sustainable energy. And yeah, absolutely. To be sure, yes, they should.
Well, I mean, I think we really do need to rein in some subsidies. And, you know, the oil subsidy, that's something that's on the table. We are not opposed to looking at all possible subsidies where government's giving a break. And I'm gonna throw this out here, and some of you will laugh, but the subsidies to PBS and NPR. Now, everybody made a joke about Big Bird, but let me give you the numbers on why this makes complete sense. See, the federal government gives PBS a subsidy. PBS runs Sesame Street. It only costs $17 million to do a year of programming for Sesame Street. You know how much money the people who own the licensing rights to Sesame Street make every year? $46 million. So explain to me why the federal government has to give a handout in subsidies to this group, which is making a profit on what they're doing. There's no reason why PBS, NPR, other subsidies that we give can't do the same thing at a lower cost. And mind you, it's $17 million because the government is subsidizing what they're doing. Imagine how much lower the cost would be if they had to lower their costs because they only had so much coming in on commercials. I mean, this is a problem. We need to look at everything. Subsidies need to be on the table. Every government program needs to be on the table before we look at raising the tax rate on the wealthiest people to bankroll everybody else. Solyndra is the greatest example. And yeah, sure, it's on Fox News, but it's the truth. Solyndra squandered away all of that money. Didn't provide any benefit to this country other than wasting our money.
Let me cut in here. It wasn't just Solyndra, though. He invested $30 billion in green energy that accomplished nothing. $30 billion. And 80% of that $30 billion, I think it was $22 billion, went to campaign contributors. I mean, that's a serious issue. And let me explain to you what $1 billion is. 1,000 millions. Okay? that's a lot of billions. And that's 3 million $10,000 checks. He could have hired students, or he could have paid for our scholarship fund. And that's a giant waste of money. $3 million, $10,000 check. That's what you're asking. So cutting subsidies is one thing, but we need to cut what the government's doing for us. That's a serious thing that we need to do.
Listen, we certainly agree that subsidies need to be cut, but this is a perfect example of pivoting on an issue. The question was, we're talking about PBS. This would be funny if it really wasn't so tragic. Let's think about it. We're talking about subsidies for public television. Who watches public television anyway? Impoverished kids. And the question is, should oil companies have subsidies? I think they should be cut. I mean, now, yes, alternative energy, certainly. Solyndra was an epic failure. But that doesn't mean you stop investing in it. I mean, alternative energy is the future. So, yeah, I mean, I think oil companies some subsidies certainly should be cut, but I'm not going to stand here and say, oh, okay, Solyndra failed, the government should stop injecting revenue in the energy of the future. Sustainable energy is certainly the future, and it will create thousands and thousands of jobs, and sustainable jobs, not 2,000 one-year jobs that this pipeline from Canada, oil sand pipeline from Canada brings. It's real job creation.
All right, because their vote was one coin toss, I guess this follow-up question is going to start with you, but then it's going to end with them.
Okay.
Mr. Imperial, with the campaigning that both parties have engaged in, and there's certainly an extraordinary amount of expenditure, would either side support campaign finance reform? Because it seems that the networks are the ones who are profiting.
Okay, that's a great question, Professor. The recent case, Citizens United versus FEC, has garnered a lot of media attention. We saw President Obama openly criticizing the decision in front of the Supreme Court, Justice Alito responding. What that decision did was it overturned the McCain-Feingold Act, a bipartisan act signed into law by George Bush that limited what corporations could spend prior to elections. Real quick, let's look at a brief history of campaign finance reform. Early 1900s started with Teddy Roosevelt. 1976, Buckley v. Vallejo, Supreme Court says any citizen can spend any amount of money he or she wants to in the political arena. That's equivalent to speech. In 1990, Austin versus Michigan Chamber of Commerce, court held that a state law that said corporations can't spend as much as they want constitutional because the reasoning in Austin was, listen, corporations are people. Right? Yes, it's a legal fiction, and Romney got a lot of guff for saying this, but it is true. They are people but not under the same way that we are under the First Amendment. They're people to drive the economic engine, not to inject capital into campaigns. 2003, a case called McConnell v. FEC. This same McCain-Feingold Act is at issue. The Supreme Court says, hey, this is constitutional. States have a big interest in limiting what corporations can spend. 2010, Citizens United, same exact bill. So Supreme Court overrules it. What changed? Sandra Day O'Connor was replaced by Justice Alito. And in the aftermath, we see unbalanced elections. We see the creation of super PACs, and it's my time. I'll finish on the ball.
Will you?
No.
There's no rebuttal? Okay.
I just want to finish one thing. So let's read it. The ruling in Citizens United, which John McCain has called the worst in Supreme Court history, has effectively rolled back close to a century of campaign finance reform. It directly contradicts precedent. For being originalist, I really have trouble reconciling how Justice Thomas and Scalia could just, where was stare decisis? I mean, it was 7 years earlier that McConnell was argued, and they effectively changed the law. Also, this is a bipartisan bill. This isn't something like admittedly, healthcare pushed through the Senate. This is something that was agreed on by John McCain, Russ Feingold, and signed into law by George W. Bush. So the result can be seen. Each side has already spent $600 million, probably will be close to $1 billion by the end of the election cycle. And this is the new election process. Thank you.
Just so I have the question right, did it create an unfair imbalance?
Would you support campaign finance reform?
Okay. Yes. I mean, the easy answer is yes. To go back to Citizens United, I don't think that we change what we have right now. I mean, both parties have received a benefit from Citizens United. Now, this is what you didn't hear, is that the Democrats wanted unions and broadcasting and media companies to only be allowed to provide money to political campaigns. And what Citizens United did was level a playing field and said, whoa, 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 whoa. Not just unions and media corporations, but all corporations. And yes, the corporation is a person. Whatever you want to say about it, that's the law in the land. A corporation is a person. So the Democrats they're upset now because before they just had unions and media corporations that were funneling them money, and then finally when the playing field got leveled and corporations were allowed to start doing, hold on, we got a problem with that. And I mean, even in the long run, Democrats are benefiting just as much from Republicans. I haven't seen any numbers that say Citizens United is unfair to Democrats because they're not getting as much funding as Republicans. political contributions are, in my opinion, one of the most important ways that we have free speech. It's the path that we want America to go down. Each individual has a voice, and each voice is important. But just as important is corporations. Corporations, union groups, nonprofit groups, they have a large stake in what happens in the path that our country goes down. So they should be allowed to give money to campaigns that benefit where they think the country should go. See, to now go ahead and say that corporations shouldn't be allowed to donate money, or unions shouldn't be allowed to donate money. I mean, we need to encourage that free speech, the political free speech of giving money to campaigns that will protect where we want America to go. And in my opinion, Citizens United hasn't given an unfair advantage to either party. It's just raised the playing field, given both groups more money, and it's allowed both groups to do more advertisements, to get out more information, and then let you, the voters, decide who you want to believe. And I think that's the point of this debate, and the point of Citizens is that they're going to say something, and we're going to say something. But ultimately, it's up to all of you to decide which path is the most, or is the one that you want to go down. And then you'll give your money, your political speech, to the candidate that you think is going to lead this country down the right road. So yes, campaign finance or reform could be on the table. Do I think Citizens United is wrong? No.
If we can just give a hand to all the candidates, this would be very
We just want to thank everyone for coming. We really do think this is important, so